Hey guys, it's Bella, and in this video we are going to look at how to read Merovingian, Visigothic, yes boys, Visigothers, we striggers in chats rise up, and the Beneventon Scripts and codicology. Now, full disclosure, I'm not amazingly familiar with these. I've learned them as part of my course, so it's going to be a bit of a bells and whistles tour, in part because these scripts aren't, with the exception of Beneventon, isn't all that important. They're not there's not that much written in them because they quickly get overtaken by more prominent ones. And unfortunately, the text on your screen is showing a type error. It's meant to say for littera Merovingiana, which is Merovingian script. It's meant to say Secules VI to VII, so from the 6th to the 7th centuries. But anyway, let us continue with our presentation. And a really exciting part about the scripts that we're looking at in this lesson is that we get the first recorded music from Western Christian Europe in this time. So you can actually listen to some of the music you might transcribe. And if you follow the link in the slides, it will play you the song that you see written down on that picture. It's quite amazing. So yeah, that would be a recap of half Untitled Script, which we don't actually need, so we're going to skip over that. But it's worthwhile to do a general historical overview of the fall of Rome because it has several implications for these three scripts, the Merovingian, the Visigothic and the Beneventan, because these are the scripts that are written by people living in Western Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. So all the scripts we covered up until now were developed while the Roman Empire in the West was still alive. However, obviously the Western Roman Empire fell in the 6th century AD, and when this happened, secular education declined quite significantly. Now, if we look at this map here, we just bear this in mind as we're going on. The reason secular education declined is because a lot of classical education centered around cultivating rhetoric for performances in public space. This rhetoric and public speaking was one of the core elements of the educational system in Roman times. And in a context where warlords increasingly were taking over territories and they were looting or they were fighting each other for territorial control, there was no longer the sort of stable political climate in which one could practice rhetoric as an effective tool of administration, and therefore its role diminished in centres further away from the core of the Roman Empire. Monasteries were the only safe places which had the wealth and the continuity to continue education, and monasteries normally had this because they would have the legend of a patron saint and the relics of a patron saint, which would give sort of supernatural protection, punishing would-be wrongdoers to the monks who inhabited these monasteries, and also because they were sort of removed from the secular world, so monks couldn't, for the most part, hold political office, although they sometimes functioned. They had this weird relationship of being sort of both in the world and away from the world. It's a complicated matter. But nonetheless, they had the wealth and continuity to preserve rhetoric and to preserve, therefore, education and copying manuscripts. And generally, as a rule of thumb, Romanitas or Romanness, it lasts longer in the centre, so closer to the east, where in Byzantium, where of course the empire continued, and it decays more the further away you get from the core. So in Britain, Romanness dies away pretty quickly, whereas in Italy, in the 6th and 7th century, they're still living in a rather similar way to people in the late Roman Empire. So, and as we discussed in the last lesson, because when the Western Roman Empire fell, you no longer had as ready contacts with Egypt, we lost the supply of papyrus, and so people started writing on vellum instead, and this promoted the Unsealed Scripts. And now let's talk about the Merovingians, who are one of the barbarian groups which came to dominate large areas of the Western Roman Empire. So the Merovingian kingdom occupied much of what is now modern-day France from about the 5th century AD until Charles Martel deposed the last king from their dynasty, who was King Childrek III, and he established the Carolingian dynasty, which would be very important because they would sort of codify one of the most important scripts of all medieval times, one of the most influential. And the Merovingians, like most of the quote-unquote barbarian tribes, they were Germanic in origin. So they originally at some point would have spoken the Germanic language, but when they settled in France, they quickly adopted the local Latin language, and we don't have very much evidence for the survival of their Germanic language. And they seem to have assimilated to Romanitas quite eagerly. So here on the screen you can see various Merovingian artifacts. You can see the seal of King Childeric, and the artwork of his seal is quite interesting actually. He's dressed up with this lamellar plate armor, much like a late Roman general, but there are some elements which are pagan or sort of Germanic as well. He's got the spear, which is more of a Germanic weapon as opposed to the Roman spatha or sort of short sword. His hair is also long, and he has a moustache, which is more of a pagan style of dress, although he is still wearing the Roman military cloak as well around his neck. And even the use of Latin as an administrative language for his government is a very Roman thing to do. So you can see in these how they have some vestiges of Germanic culture, but they are for the most part diving into and becoming Roman. They're making glass like the Romans did. They're printing coins with sort of Eastern crosses, emulating the Eastern Romans. They're building Romanesque churches like in the bottom left hand corner. All of this. And so now let's have a look at not the epigraphic script like we see in the tombstone, but we'll look at the Littera Merovingiana, which they wrote on parchment. So the Merovingian scripts developed largely from Roman cursive. So you got Old Roman cursive, you went to later Roman cursive, and then this in France would develop into Merovingian script. And as we saw with later Roman cursive, it gets very highly exercised when you have to write a lot of charters and repeat this process over and over again. And so what we call Merovingian script refers to a wide variety of bookhand script families in the region, and each of these script families have a sort of distinctive type based on the monastery wherein people were trained to write. So if you think about it, a monastery is going to be producing and reproducing its own scribes. Scribes who grew up at this monastery learn to write from elders at that monastery, and they will teach the next generation, and so on and so forth. So local monasteries can tend to get a signature. Now monks did of course travel to different regions and different monasteries, and books travelled as well, but we can generally identify the main families of Merovingian scripts from the major monasteries of the Merovingian kingdom, and these are from Luxeuil, I'm butchering the French names, do forgive me, Luxeuil, Lyon, Corbie and Chelles. So those are the four main Merovingian families, and you don't need to be able to recognise them, don't worry, that's the job of more advanced paleographers than I. And these customary skills have some degree of overlap with the preceding half unsealed script, so they share many letter forms in common. They borrow a lot of letter forms from half unsealed, and unfortunately there are relatively few manuscripts written in Merovingian script, so it's hard to say much with certainty about their evolution. Although one thing that will be said is that there wasn't the political stability, and there wasn't the centralized government required for Merovingian scripts to become consolidated and standardized. If you think about it, if you want to have the organization necessary for everybody in a given geographic region such as France to be writing in the same way, you need to have the political power to do that. You need to have the ability to deputize people to go to each of the monasteries and like, this is how you write, and to make sure that they're writing in this way. And so the Merovingian dynasty never had that degree of centralized control like the Carolingian dynasty would, and so Merovingian scripts were in the plural, and they were much more heterogeneous than their Carolingian counterparts would be in the following centuries. But let's have a look at the main one, the most prominent one, the Luxio, I don't know, this type from Luxio. So some of the noteworthy features that stand out are the A, the open A. It doesn't close in Merovingian, and the first of the two samples you've got here is sort of almost like bull horns, it looks like to me. And this is the open A is a trend borrowed from Roman cursive. This happens with the D as well. The D doesn't fully close. You have the sort of curved N rather than the straight line N. So this straight line N is taken from half uncial, whereas this one is a more cursive form. What else do we have? Oh, here is so this is something that happens in later Roman cursive as well, but the T develops this rather annoying little curl that comes over here. And in one of the scribes, I believe it's Visigothic, we'll see in a second, it actually goes all the way down basically. And so the T looks like an A. It's the most annoying thing I hate, and I hate it so much. Quite a beautiful X over there. But a noteworthy factor is that there is a lot of ligature and abbreviation in these scripts, because remember, they're developing from minuscule scripts, so it's quite a cursive script, and they are writing a lot of things at high speed, so they want to merge letters together as fast as possible. If I'm honest, I don't fully know what all of these are. I know this is going to be ET for et. This is probably EX. X. That is, I do not know. GI. OB. I think that's a TI. And then that there is quam. But yeah, it can be hard to tell what each of these are. Here is an example of Merovingian script. I will read out from the H. So it's a bit faded, but it says hec. So hec cum dixisset voce magna clamavit Lazare veni foras et sta blah blah. So a note about the punctuation here. You can see these little medial points. These are called puncta medio, or the middle points. And the text here is laid out by what's called percola et comata, which basically is it's not an exact science to my understanding, but it's basically where sort of semantic blocks are separated off within the text between points, with these dots, and then sometimes you'd have two dots to indicate a sort of the end of a larger sentence, or as more commonly would be done, it would just be done by a new paragraph, so to speak. And you can see that there. So I'm showing you basically at the very top of the page you have the end of one paragraph, one sort of verse almost, then you have a new one that begins, and then in the penultimate line you have abire, and then the rest of the line is blank, and it starts with a new rubric. So it starts with red, saying I think that's multi, and then you know that that's a new sentence basically. And the verse, what it's saying here is, when he had said this, with a great voice he shouted, and then it goes Lazare veni foras, so come forth Lazarus. And that command that Jesus gives is given between the two dots, because that is sort of telling you that it's a different semantic bit of information. That is Jesus's direct speech. And we can identify a few characteristics of the Merovingian script. We can see the T with the curl. We can see the A, the open A. What else do we have? Do we have a more obviously open A, as in one that curls backwards a bit? Not quite. We can see some ligature here. So this is actually mortus. So M-O-R-T, and the T sort of merges into the next U, and then US. We can see the iconic sort of Z-like G with a flat top, taken from later Roman cursive. We've got a sort of two curved A, two chambered A. What else do we have? We can see the tall S. I believe that's, I think that's Facies, so facies ilius sudario, blah blah blah. So yeah, this is a basic introduction to what Merovingian script looks like. And here is here's another much nastier example that, I mean, I can pick out some words, but it's like, non depiciet princeps ex iuda neque dux. If I can figure out what that is, I'd probably be able to get through it, but it's quite nasty. With a lot of these, actually, if I'm approaching something like this as a paleographer, I would figure it out when I see it in a word, and an abbreviation like that in a word, and I just know what it is because I know how the Latin word normally ends. I'm like, okay, that's probably what it is. But in this case, I'm not fully sure, if I'm honest. But you can see some of the same features. So you can see the T with the curl, you can see the open A. Let's find an open A. Where's the open A? I mean, there's a sort of open A there. Jacob up there is an open A, but they also have a closed A, so they have this more unsealed type of A that they're taking in from half unsealed, because remember, there's a lot of borrowing from half unsealed. Here again, I believe that's a T. Again, this is very hard for me to read as well, so don't feel bad. You can get used to it. I'm being harsher to Merovingian than it deserves, but it is still pretty difficult. Tall S, SE. Do we have a G anywhere? Do we have that iconic sort of Z-like G? I think that's it. I think that's a G, like a Z-like G. But yeah, there you go. So, and this is, by the way, another example of cool things. This is another of these unknown texts that supposedly is attributed to Pope Gregory the Great, and the whole manuscript is available for free online on the BNF website, Bibliothèque Nationale de France. So if anyone wants to, you can go and transcribe this and print it as an edition, and you can write a paper on it. There you go. Here's another one, and I'll just read out one line for the sake of ease. And it's De Divisione, and that's a weird one actually. That almost looks like a like the Gothic O, doesn't it? I mean, that's certainly very unusual. It's got that weird O-like shape. So De Divisione, and then that's Gentium. So if I'm understanding this, sometimes you have to like think about the logic of why the shape is meant to be certain letters. I know it just because of the Latin. If I'm understanding it, I think what it is, okay, so the T is going to go like, it's going to have those line going down, horizontal line, right? So the horizontal line goes down into the I, that's the TI, on the right side. But on the left side, it sort of curls up. So it looks like a longer minim stroke. It adds to the vertical minim stroke. Am I making sense? I don't think I'm making sense, but I'm trying to explain how basically if you sort of take the left bit of the T and you shift it upright at a 90-degree angle, and then you take the right horizontal stroke of the T and you let it go out a bit, and then you take it down, the downwards bit is the I, the descender is the I, and that top bit is the other part of the T. So that's why it's a TI mixed together. And some weirdo Merovingian scribe supposedly thought that was easier than writing them separately. And there you go. So, De Divisione Gentium Pauca dicamus. So, concerning the division of people, we will say a few things. Blah, blah, blah. So it's about like how people are divided up geographically. Right, so now let's go on to Visigothic Script. So, we Ostrogoths in chat, rise up. So, Iberia. The Iberian Peninsula was taken from the Romans by the Visigoths, and they followed a very similar pattern to the Merovingians. So they assimilated to the Latinate culture of the region quite quickly. Unlike in Ostrogothic Italy, there's very little evidence that the Visigoths maintained the Gothic language to any significant degree. One thing is that I believe it's King Recared, maybe the first of Spain. It was he who converted Spain to Roman Catholicism instead of the Arian faith that the Visigoths had. And he ordered the burning of Arian books, which may have included sort of Gothic Bibles. So it's possible that, like in Ostrogothic Italy, the Gothic language was used as a liturgical language in the church. But to my understanding, in Ostrogothic Italy, we also have reference to lingua nostra, sort of our language, being associated with the military, and this is not the same in Visigothic Spain. It seems like the military in Visigothic Spain spoke Latin, and like the rest of the citizenry, basically, they just kept speaking Latin. And the Visigothic culture would, of course, fade away when Spain would be conquered by the Moors, and I'm forgetting now precisely when it is that happens, do forgive me. So let's talk about Littera Mozarabica. That's one of the reasons we call it Littera Mozarabica, or we can say Littera Visigothica, whichever one you prefer. And that lasts from the 9th to the 10th centuries. So Littera Mozarabica, also known as Visigothic Script, it's the script used in the Iberian Peninsula, even in Moorish Spain, because the Moors sort of allowed Christians to continue to be Christians and continue their traditions as long as they paid taxes. So Christian culture sort of did continue to flourish in Muslim Spain. Now, Bernard Bischoff points to some similarities in the script with manuscripts from Sinai, and so he suggests that there is a North African influence on Visigothic script, which, given the fact that you have a Moorish invasion, would not be too surprising. So the main features of Visigothic script are the open A with the horns looking a bit like a U. We'll see. I mean, frankly, the Merovingian looks a bit like a U as well, but in Visigothic script it's more extreme. You have a long D and an unsealed D used interchangeably or concomitantly. And sometimes they start to imply what's called an I longer, which is basically when you have an I and it has a small descender, it goes below the minimum line, and sometimes that descender curves a little bit. It's like the beginnings of the letter J that we have today. They have a T with a left bar. This is the really iconic Visigothic thing. So the T, it basically, the left bar, it sort of loops down and it basically ends up looking like an A. It goes down to the bottom of the minimum height. You have an R, and its shoulder stroke curls up quite dramatically at the end of words, and they, like Merovingians, make more frequent use of ligatures. So here we go. This is what I mean by the T. That's the iconic letter. That's the Visigothic T right there. Disgusting. I mean, it kind of is. Let's be honest. So there we have the open A. Almost, it looks a lot like a U. The U is defined by having two straight lines. That's how you can tell them apart. So the A, one of the lines is going to be curved. In the U, they're both going to be straight. That's the difference. That's how you can tell them apart. You can see here the tall-backed cursive D and the sloped-back unsealed D that are used sort of interchangeably. That's the I longer, basically. The L will have a little flick at the end, whereas the I longer will not. And also the I longer will go below the baseline. What else do we have? And there is the R. You can see the shoulder stroke extends a bit and it flicks up a bit, whereas the S, it'll go straight down. There's the Z. Where's the G? The G here is actually an unsealed G. It's not the flat top half unsealed G. So that's iconic. And frankly, I'll be honest with you, these ligatures, I can give a guess at some of them. This might be feria, perhaps FR for feria, so day, because in the Iberian Peninsula they use the word feria for sort of a day of the week. Don't know. I mean, that's T and IT, but I don't know what's meant to. Oh, and that's not actually a T. That's a VUL, but I do not know what it is. That is TI, I think. That's T and a long I. I have no idea. EUR. You know, it's really hard. XR. TI. What? Oh, it's so painful. Okay, well, let's move on. Let's have a look at some Visigothic. So, this here is not British Library ADMS 30845. This is ADMS 30844. And this is folio 1B. It's Visigothic script. I will read out to you from the top here. I'll try at least. So it's Lectio VA TEM, and I think that's IBI. et pastores et wait. Okay. Et pastores errant. See how easy it is to be you confused for you. So et pastores errant in regione eadem vigilantes et custodientes vigilias noctis. That's CTIS. Supra gregem sum et ecce, and that's an e caudata, which we'll get to in the Carolingian episode, but it basically means when it's meant to say AE, but they don't write the A and they put a little tail at the end. So et ecce angelus domini, DNI, if we remember our nomina sacra from last lesson. Statit. Let's see. What? IUPTA. No, that's an X. That's an X, I think. It must be juxta illos, just based on the Latin juxta. But it looks like IUFTA, but whatever. Juxta illos et claritu. Et claritas Dei circum, and that's a U with an abbreviation mark above it indicating that an M has been removed. So circum fulcit illos et tumuerunt. Okay. So we got through it. I was able to read through that bloody section for you. I'll go from the beginning one more time. Errant in regione eadem vigilantes et custodientes vigilas noctis supra gregem sum et ecce angelus domini statit juxta illos et claritas Dei circumfulcit illos et tumuerunt. So you can see what the Visigothic script is like. It is quite difficult, she said, complaining. I'm not going to read it, but here's a nice example with some music, actually. Yeah, I think that's stupid. Yeah, stupid. The U looks like an A. You can see the T ends up curving so much that it looks like an A. But yeah, there's some music for you. It's quite exciting. Visigothic chant. Here's another one. I didn't even mention what text it is. Don't know why I've included it, but there's no point in me struggling to read through it. You can struggle to read through it if you choose to. And now let's move on to Beneventon Scripts. So Beneventon Scripts developed in the Beneveto province of southern Italy. And it was a region that, because it had greater contact with the Eastern Roman Empire, was still steeped in quite a lot of Romanitas. Even in the days of the Ostrogothic kingdom, this region had a lot more contact with the East, and it seems to be that there were fewer Gothic troops moved into the south than in the north, so it retained more of their Romanness. Here we have the monastery of Monte Cassino, a very famous one, and the cathedral in Bari, which are two big centres where Beneventon Script developed in Italy. So let's look at Littera Langobardica, also called Beneventon, so Lombard script basically. It didn't develop from Parpontial, but it rather developed from an elaborate form of later Roman cursive. It lasted for about 5 centuries, and it spread from the south of Italy thereafter to much of the Italian peninsula. And it had these local styles that developed, especially at its main centres of Monte Cassino and Bari. And it was because you had these very important and productive monasteries which made a lot of books which could then be exported to the rest of Italy. This is what helped to spread the scripts developed in Monte Cassino and Bari to these other regions of Italy. These are things which account for what are called Schriftbunde in German, sort of writing areas, and we'll encounter another one of them quite soon next week when we do the insular scripts, because they also in Britain and Ireland share a sort of Schriftbund together. So the key distinguishing features of Beneventon script include a closed OC like A, so it looks like an O and a C, and an E which always has two bows instead of the sort of curved uncial E. Now, observant viewers will note that the closed OCA will look really, really similar to the Visigothic T. The only way to tell is that on the bottom bit, so you have an O and a C, right? At the bottom of the C there's a little bit of a curl going towards the right hand side. In Visigothic T there will not be that curl, and in the Beneventon A there will be that curl. It's really difficult, I know, it's horrible, but you gotta bear with it. You also have a T, which in the in Beneventon script, it has a looped bow on the left hand side, which doesn't normally go all the way down, it just loops in on itself. But the bar going to the right, it goes straight out, it doesn't go up or down or bend in any way. They frequently use the I longer, especially in initial position, it's like a J, and they also use a lot of ligatures. They use the tall S, and they are some of the first people to make really abundant use of the character ampersand as an abbreviation for ET, for the sound of ET. So in a word where you might have ET, they would use the ampersand. And so here we have an example of the letters of Beneventon script. It's also written with quite a thick pen, I meant to say as well. So you can see the the OC like A, so that's an A. Don't know why they haven't included a B, but there's a C, E. That's the two sort of chambered E. It looks a lot like a Greek epsilon, actually, simple epsilon. You have the T, so that T looks quite similar to the Visigothic T, actually. In this example, it is actually going all the way down. That is, I believe, a TI ligature. No, sorry, that's a TI. That might be EI abbreviation. RI. Don't fully know what that is. Another EI, DO, this kind of thing. Some letters will bite into each other. And this word here, anyone want to guess what it is? It is regeret, REGERET, and they can sometimes join them along a line like that, which I find quite neat. Okay, so here is an exciting one, actually. It's still somewhat exciting. So now this is a part of Isidore's etymologies, and I chose it because it's got a bit about defining what a dragon is, which is really fun to read about dragons in medieval manuscripts. So I will read from this line here, Draco. So, Draco major cunctorum, and that's the U with an abbreviation mark there, cunctorum serpent. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so that's a TO, it must be, for serpentorum, but, well, that must be TOR. So that must be some kind of abbreviation for TOR, even though it looks like a CI, quite frankly. So serpentorum sive omnium, and that's another abbreviation, the M has been left off. Omnium, and that's the OC like A. Animantium, now that's an interesting one. They've written C, so animantium instead of, or animantium instead of animantium, which is what the proper Latin would be. This is one of the spelling errors showing you that whoever's writing this in the, I believe, this is going to be like 9th-ish century. Whoever's writing this is confusing their T sound for their C sound or their T sound. So, animantium, and then this is an abbreviation for P, and then ER, that's per. And we'll look at the abbreviations more fully in the Carolingian episode. So super terram hunc Greci dracontam vocant. So The dragon is the largest of all serpents, or all animals living above the earth. This animal the Greeks call a drakonta. So there you go, dragons. Here's a nice one. This is the introduction to the rule of Saint Benedict, where he says, Monachorum quattuor esse genera manifestum est. It is clear that there should be 4 ranks, classes, 4 types of monks. The first is a Cenobitorum, etc. So these are the ones fighting in the monastery, all of this lot, etc. Here is another one, and this is, I believe, a prayer, the sacramentary. So it says, Cordibus nostris Domine benignus infunde. It says, fill our hearts, O Lord, so on and so forth. Oh, okay, I thought there was a more exciting one. Okay, maybe there's in the samples at the end. But anyway, so now we should talk a little bit about codicology and choir reconstruction. This is a bit boring, but it's useful, so bear with me. So we talked about folios last time, which are these leaves of parchment, and they would be folded into choirs. So when you fold them up, you've got, I wish I could show it with my hands, but you've got sort of, you know what a folded bit of paper looks like. So when you get that, you have a minimum of 2 folded sheets, and this means that each choirs, when you have minimum of 2 sheets folded together, you have a minimum of 4 folios. So you have 4 sides, right? Even if it's just 1 page. And then if you have an odd number of choirs, that means that some folios have been lost or they've been rearranged in the manuscript. So this is really important. So if you're counting your choirs and you have an odd number, this tells you that somewhere you've lost one. And this can be really important, because if you have a text that you're reconstructing, we don't have a full version of it, and you find a bit that suddenly starts on a different topic, but it looks like it could have been the end of a sentence, it might be that you've actually just lost a folio in your manuscript, rather than that representing a genuine break in the text, which is why folio and choir reconstruction is very important for manuscript studies. In continental manuscripts, folios were generally arranged so that you'd have a hair side facing a hair side, because when you skin a calf and you use limestone to make the fat come away, and then you would scrape away the hairs that would still stay in the follicles, but these would still leave marks. You can see sort of the little hair follicle holes if you look closely on these. It's quite a notable difference, whereas the side that was facing the inside of the animal, the fat is very smooth and clearer. So continental manuscripts would generally arrange themselves so that you'd have a hair side facing a hair side and flesh side facing a flesh side. So this can also help you with reconstruction. So if you have a continental manuscript, say it's written in Beneventon Script, but then you suddenly have a hair side that's facing a flesh side, this can tell you that maybe the choirs have been rearranged incorrectly, because they wouldn't have done that in the time. However, in insular manuscripts, they would do it hair flesh, hair flesh. So if you have one that's written in one of the insular scripts, but it's a hair side facing a hair side, then that might tell you that one of the folios have been rearranged and your manuscript is out of order. So these are the clues you can use to help you reconstruct the order a manuscript was originally in, because since you have these folios that are just sewn in together to make a book, you can take them out, you can rearrange them, you can trade folios with other people, and this happened all the time. So the contents of what we would call books got changed around quite a lot in the Middle Ages, and more so over time as later centuries broke down certain manuscripts and people would take bits out and move them around, etc., etc. Because most manuscripts were unbound in the Middle Ages, so they wouldn't have a hardcover wooden back. They would be wrapped in leather or cloth. Sometimes in Ireland we have evidence from the Springmount bogs for these little leather bags in which people would carry these books around. And scribes would just have books with the choirs sewn together with string, and they would often combine it with other choirs which had related texts to form a sort of volume. So the combination of text that we have in any medieval manuscript today is not necessarily the same combination that was intended for that script. So when the scribe was writing, it could have some bits of the scribe's production taken away. There could be some that are added to the final manuscript that we have today in the present. And this is a really important thing to bear in mind when we're dealing with medieval manuscripts. And you can see here little pictures of how it works. So each of these are folios, right? And a quire, your basic quire, is going to have 4 of these sewn together along the middle, and each of these sides is going to be 1 folio. So that's where my cursor is now, is going to be the recto, the folio recto, and then return the page, it's going to be folio verso, and then that's going to, so 1R, 1V, then 2R and 2V on the other side, and so on and so forth. And here you have some basic examples of what the folios look like when they're laid out. So this is quire 1, and you can see it laid out on the page, and then this is quire 2 on the inside, and you can see how that looks like when it's laid out on the page. Likewise, you can see how it looks sometimes when you have a quire that's been missing. So in this one there are 3 quires, but the middle one has lost a folio, a page has been taken away. So you're going to have, maybe you'll have a hair side facing a flesh side, and that'll tell you that something has been taken away in this quire. And here you can see the holes where the parchment has been sewn together, and that's how the books would have been kept originally. So there you go. Now, as we mentioned in the introductory video where we're talking about the process by which we get historical information, during the Middle Ages, scribes extensively copied texts, and especially the works of classical authors. And each time this happens, there are various ways in which you can introduce scribal error. So the most important of these are phonetic spelling errors, such as the scribe who wrote a C instead of a T in the word animantium in the dragon example that we read earlier. And this usually happens when a scribe is having a text read aloud to them and they're copying it down. But sometimes in the Middle Ages, they didn't even speak the language very fluently. This happens often in Ireland, actually, where you have scribes who may know how to write the letters out, but they actually don't speak Latin very well. So they would make obvious mistakes that somebody who speaks Latin would never think to make, even if it's someone who speaks Latin quite poorly. Sometimes, by contrast, though, you have overcorrections, which is when a scribe attempts to correct an earlier variation or something that they perceive to be a mistake, which isn't actually a mistake. And that E with the tail below it, in the word ecce that we looked at earlier in, I believe it was a Visigothic example, that's an example of what's called hypercorrection. It's when a scribe, in the regular Latin word, it's just E-C-C-E, but the scribe saw the E and saw O. In a lot of words where it's written A-E, I am writing it with an E, and I'm writing it with an E and writing a tail below it to indicate the abbreviation. But so maybe somebody else has done this and they haven't, and I need to correct it by going in and putting in the tail to indicate that it was originally written with an AE. So this scribe clearly doesn't know that the original Latin word does not have AE, it's just a regular E. I don't know if I've explained that very well, but you can have overcorrection. The best example of the funniest example of overcorrections is some scribes in Ostrogothic Italy writing Latin, they would write Hitalia. They would put a H in because many grammatical guides, like the ones that Cassiodorus compiled, they would so often tell people, don't drop your H. You have to write in your H, like in hordeum and his, etc. in Latin, all these words beginning with a H, because clearly when people were speaking their Latin, they weren't pronouncing the H. But sometimes when scribes see these instructions, they're like, oh, okay. And they don't actually, because they're not speaking the H, they don't actually know when to put it in and when to leave it out. So they get over eager and they put it in words which didn't originally have a H, like in Italia. So that's why you see Hitalia in there. Sometimes you get omissions. Some of them are deliberate and some of them are accidental when copying. So an accidental one might be a scribe just, their eye skips, they miss a word, or they miss an ending, or they think that one letter is a different letter. This quite often happens. Or a scribe is reading a manuscript from a different scriptorium which uses a different set of abbreviations, and the scribe might find those abbreviations confusing, and so the scribe tries to write out the word in full, but the scribe gets it wrong because the scribe is not familiar with those particular abbreviations. This happens quite a lot when insular manuscripts are copied out in continental centres. So Irish manuscripts, when they get copied in continental centres, Irish abbreviations are very unique, so continental scribes quite often get it wrong. But a more alarming example of deliberate omissions is, and this is granted in a translation, so it's not just a pure copying, but when Alfred Jovivcham translates the life of Saint Eugenia, he deliberately omits all sorts of information. He omits a whole sort of sub-story about the Bishop Helenus, who is Eugenia's sort of tutor, for various reasons, but he omits Helenus from the story. And that's an example of how omissions can affect the copying of a text. And then lastly, you sometimes, rarely, but you sometimes get insertions from the part of the scribe. Whether this is because the scribe wants to inject their own opinions, or they think that this is what the original author would have meant, or sometimes, as in the case of one of the manuscripts of the life of Saint Nereus and Achilleus, one of the scribes seemed to have just inserted a new character who accompanies the main heroes on their adventures, like a little fan fiction OC insert, and it's just very sweet, but this does sometimes happen. So when we collate different manuscript witnesses of a text, this can help us to reconstruct a likely version. So let's say we have manuscripts A, B, C, D, E, and F, okay? And if A, B, C, and D all just have a story of Jack and Jill, and then manuscripts E and F have a story of Jack and Jill and Bill, chances are probably good that somewhere along the line in the history, E and F both were copying from the same book of somebody who had added in this Bill character to the story, when the original story probably just had Jack and Jill. So this is a very crude example of how we can use manuscript studies to identify the original stories of medieval texts. And for the Lives of Saint, which is one of the stuff that I do for my PhD research, this is especially important because they are legends and they change a lot over time. And so there you go. Now we have some notes for your homework. You can find samples of all of the scripts at that link, and that if you want to, you can write a manuscript description, but it really does not matter. That was for my student. That's an example of a manuscript description. You can see them in any sort of online manuscript database website. Some of them have more information, some of them have less. The British Library is usually quite good in giving you a lot of information. But yeah, they can be valuable things to read. Here we are. Here's the exciting one. So this is I think it's 8th or 7th century manuscript written in, I believe this is Beneventon Script, and it is the Lives of the Saints, and this is the story of Saint Nereus and Achilleus, and I had to translate this bit for my master's dissertation, and it's just a really fun story, so I thought I'd read it for you directly from the manuscript. So, going from the top line, it says, Datur, and then, Quodcum fecit populus, dixit Simonus, modus si eum, et si modum si eum, ego suscitavero interficitis Petrum, and that's a question mark there. So, modus si eum ego suscitavero interficitis Petrum, and then responditque omnis turba, the whole crowd replied, Vivum eum incendimus, we will burn him alive. And Simon had said, when he'd done this, the crowd said, Simon said to the crowd, but if I resuscitate this dead boy, will you kill Peter? And the crowd says, we will burn him alive. Tunc Simon invocatis daemonis ministerio eorum cepit agere ut moveretur corpus. Then Simon, with invoked demons, by their ministry, by their service, began to act so that the body might move. Quod populi videnter cepiset clamare in laudem Simonis et pernicem Petri. The crowd, when they saw this, began to shout in praise of Simon and in sort of condemnation of Peter. Tunc Petrus vix impetrato silentio ait. Then Peter, hardly sort of forced into silence, spoke and said, ad populum, to the people, si vivit loquatur, ambulet, accipia cibum, revertatur ad domum suam. If it is awake, let it speak, let him walk, accept food, and go back to his home. Quod si non fecerit, I think that's quod si non fecerit sciatis vos fallace Simone. Sciatis vos fallia Simone. You will know that you have been deceived by Simon. So what this is depicting a sort of magical battle between the Apostle Peter and this pagan magician Simon over who can resuscitate a boy, and the crowd is going to kill whoever cannot do it with the power of their gods. It's really exciting stuff, and this sample is really good to show a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about in this lecture. So we have the word et here being used quite frequently, the ampersand for the symbol for the sound of et. Here it is again for the word Petrus. So P-E-T-R-U-S. So the sound et is being used by the ampersand, is being represented by the ampersand. We see a question mark here for the first time. That little Q-like thing above the semicolon is a question mark. We can see the OC like A of Beneventon Script in this word agere here. What else do we have? We have the word Petris here. We have the RIS ligature, showing some of the ligatures that are quite common in Beneventon Script. There was a phonological mistake. Here we are. So the scribe here originally wrote silentio. Silentio in classical pronunciation, but somebody has later come through and corrected it and written an I on top, because the original Latin word is silentio. So this is telling us that the scribe who was writing down this manuscript pronounced the I and the E in this word as basically the same, so the scribe got confused. These are some of the ways in which we can reconstruct how Latin was spoken at this time. Do we have anything else that's interesting to comment on here? No, I think that's basically it. It's a pretty exciting little bit of text. Here's one of Isidore's on the ocean. This is unsealed. I don't know why I've put this in there. I should take it out. Here is the Life of St. Martin, Book 1. You'll notice that this is, to an observant viewer, this is rustic capital script. This one here is Visigothic, and we can tell that it's Visigothic by the T, which goes all the way down to the bottom. So for my Wiestrowiggers who want to work on some Visigothic text, this is the one for you. The Life of St. Martin, the beginning, first book. So until next time, Goradach Alim, and yes, have a good day.